Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Making the Argument. Recently, I spoke at a homeschool convention in South Carolina, and one of the topics I spoke on was raising sons, and specifically raising your sons to one day be the sort of dangerous men that their family are going to require. Now, some of the things I advocate for are probably a little bit controversial within this culture, but when you look at the sort of masculinity that this culture has produced, I guess you got to ask yourself the question, do you want what's popular or do you want what works? And that's what we discussed about. It was a great discussion and answered a lot of questions from the audience. I hope you will enjoy it. Here it is, raising sons to be the dangerous dads their families require. Okay, so I'm sitting there with my wife, my two daughters, and my son. And my son's about 7, right, at this time. And we're watching this movie called Real Steel. Now, if you've never seen it, think Rocky, but with robots. So we're watching Real Steel, and Luke's kind of, he's 7, right? He's a 7-year-old little boy, so he's kind of like getting rambunctious and whatnot. And I look over at Tina, my wife, and I said, "Hey, babe, do you know what the agoge is?" She goes, "What's the agoge?" I said, the agoge is where the Spartans sent their children when they turned 7. They sent their boys when they turned 7 to the agoge. And it was this incredibly brutal exercise that they went through. Think of it as camp, right? But the kind where you could die at it. And this was the beginning of their training to become Spartan warriors. And she goes, "Okay." And I look over at Luke. I'm like, "Hey, buddy, come here." Because we're watching a boxing movie, right? So we hands up, guard your face, let's go. And he's moving around, and we'd kind of like wrestled before and rough and tumble and the whole deal. And this time, I got him. Not hard, but hard enough, just to kind of ring the bell a little bit. And he looks at me and he goes, and he just runs and he tackles me and just starts like, we're boxing, right? We're boxing. And she looks at me and she goes, "What just happened to my little boy?" And I said, "Oh, no. He's not yours anymore. Now he belongs to me." Right? And I like to share that story because it's funny, but there's this element of truth. Now, I will tell you this. I don't think there's anybody in this world my son loves more than his mama. Right? It's that special bond between mother and son. And they got it, right? He loves his mama, always will love his mama. But at that point, it was this turning point where it's like, this is the point where the rough and tumble gets a little bit rougher. Because it has to. The world is a dangerous place, and he's going to occupy a particular place in that world. And my job is to prepare him for it. Now, more and more information, studies, and everything is going out to confirm what I think a lot of us already knew. And that is this cultural drive to take our children away from us as soon as they possibly can and put them in a variety of institutions which separate them from their parents from the time that they're little until the time that they graduate and leave isn't very good for kids. They need that time to bond. That's true of both boys and girls. But for this conversation, I'm talking specifically about boys. And I say this as someone that has a very good relationship with my father. But I saw my father about 3 months out of the year on average, maybe 4 on a good year, growing up, ever since the time I was 3 until I left for the military. So my mother also had to play a big role in my life as well, as did my grandparents. But this process of raising a boy to be a man is something that I think we've kind of increasingly lost sight of as society has overall become safer. Right? The idea of a boy having to go off to a training camp where they could potentially die at age 7 in order to begin the process for eventually becoming a hoplite warrior within the Spartan state seems absolutely absurd and draconian to us. And the question is, did the Spartans do it just because they were a sick, demented, twisted civilization? Or were there some practical reasons why it was necessary? Now, if you study a little bit about the Spartans, you're going to realize that part of it was a little bit sick and demented. But there was the very real the very real responsibility to have to actually defend the polity against raids, against attacks, against invasion. And so it was necessary for boys to start to recognize and to start to look into the future and understand what their duties and responsibilities would be for the protection of the state. Now we live in a civilization, we live in a country where very few people are needed in order to fulfill that responsibility, in order to provide for the protection of the community. We have some in law enforcement, we have some in the military, we obviously have people that fulfill similar obligations in things like first responders and fire departments, but none of you live in fear that the Mongolian horde might decide to show up today, burn your city to the ground, kill all the men, and sell the women and children into slavery. I don't think that's an issue in South Carolina. And over time, I think we've gotten soft due to abundance. The problem is that the surest way to guarantee that you will one day live in a civilization where you absolutely need your 7-year-old to be training to fight is to believe that human civilization and human nature has evolved so much that we would never once again be in a time where you would need to do things like that to ensure your safety and security. Human traditions change. Human nature stays the same. Anybody that tells you that human beings are naturally good has never raised a 2-year-old. I once had a young mom tell me, Nick, I have to believe that people are basically good. I said, you have a child? She goes, yes. I said, let me ask you a question. If we took a room full of 2-year-olds, put them in there together, threw one toy into the middle, would they come up with a very organized, fair, and equitable way to share the toy to ensure that everybody got ample toy time? Or would a couple of those kids just beat the crap out of everybody, take that thing, and now it's their toy and the rest of you can sit in the corner and cry? She goes, oh my gosh, we're evil. I said, yes. Yes. Yeah, God lets us know. He pretty much gave that part away. Yes, you have an evil, sinful nature, and that's part of why we need redemption. It's also why we need parents to guide us through this process. And while boys and girls need similar things with respect to love, with respect to safety, with respect to security, with respect to provision, there are very specific differences with respect to what boys and girls need. You heard that radical statement in the introduction that boys and girls are different. So your boy, as they start to get a little bit older, needs to start to be confronted with challenges. Age-appropriate challenges that are difficult emotionally and physically. That whole idea of the rough and tumble with dad, a lot of times moms, especially if it's like their baby boy or their first child and it's a boy, they look at the things that dad is doing, like throwing them onto the bed from the other room and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, what are you doing? It's like, no, this is part of the process. This is part of what men do to bond with their children. And with their sons, calling out the man inside them is an incredibly important task that has to take place. You are not protecting your son by alleviating them of the challenges, burdens, and dangers that life faces. You have to prepare them for it. So I remember another episode where my kid was playing soccer. And it was pee-wee soccer. And playing soccer is probably a generous way to describe what he was doing. Randomly walking around, looking at the sky. There's a bird, and like picking flowers. That was actually what he was doing. And so his pee-wee team wins the game, and he comes over to me, and he's very, very proud, and he's like, Dad, did I do a good job? Nope. Other parents are looking at me like, you are horrible. I'm like, no, son, you didn't. But we won. Not because of you. Well, what do you mean? Buddy, you're playing soccer. This is a team sport. Your team was relying on you to do certain things. You didn't do any of them. Your team won in spite of you, not because of you. That's the reality, buddy. So, I still love you, but no, you didn't play a good game. And he's a little bit despondent by this. So the next game, he shows up and he is running all over the place and he's doing his level best to score goals and the whole deal, and his team loses. And he's a little bit despondent. And I'm like, hey, buddy, good job. He's like, but we lost. I said, I know, and that sucks. Because I'm never going to tell you that, losing is fun. It isn't. You want to win. That's why you're here. You're here to win, not just have fun. I don't care whatever the lame parents say. You're here to win too. I said, but you did your job. You went out and fulfilled your responsibilities. You gave in your effort. You might need to practice some more. You might need to do some other things in order to do a better job next time if you want to win, but you did your job. Now, again, some people might think that's harsh. I don't, because let me ask you a question. When I say the term, be a man, what most of you are probably thinking in your heads, what the men are probably thinking in their heads is when you say be a man, what does that mean? I guarantee almost every man in this room had some sort of instinct on what it meant. And what it typically means is a man is the sort of person that does what needs to be done regardless of fear or pain. They do their job. When someone says, that guy's a good man, it almost always refers to being able to protect, to be able to provide, to be able to face danger, to be able to face hardship, and to do their job, to keep their word. That's what it should mean to be a man. And those lessons start early. You can start them later if you want, but what you're doing is you're enshrining really, really bad habits, and then you're trying to correct them in their teen years. Good luck. Start them early. Men should be honest. I'll never forget, there was one time where my son, probably about 4 years old, he lied to my wife. And we did not deal well with lying in our household. If there was one of the key things that would get the worst punishments that you would ever get was not for coloring on the walls or sticking pennies into the light socket or whatever other dumb stuff toddlers do. If you lied to us, that's where the most draconian punishments came for. And I'll never forget my wife taking my son aside at one point and looking at him, 4 or 5 years old, and going, do you want to be an honorable man like Daddy? Honorable men don't lie. They tell the truth, even if it hurts, even if they're scared, they tell the truth. That did two things right there. One, it taught him something about the importance of honesty, because that's not just honesty, that's courage. It's honesty in the face of consequences and doing it anyways. Two, she was also encouraging me to be a better man, right? My wife was lifting me up to my son, but as she was lifting me up, she was also calling me to be a better man, to be an example, because that's who she was pointing to for him. And here's the thing I will tell dads. A lot of dads think, well, I'm just not really creating the standard for my son. Oh, yes, you are. It might not be the standard you want, but you are creating the standard whether you show up or not. You are creating the standard. Because every son desperately wants to believe that his dad is a superhero. When he says, my dad could beat up your dad, he wants it to be true. So you put him through these challenges. You point out those things that are character developing traits. I remember the first time my son got into a situation where he got in a bit of a scuffle and lost. And my wife's inclination at that point was, well, I'm gonna call the parents. And I said, no. Why? Because he's got to figure it out. He's 12. And? Now, he wasn't in a dangerous situation. It's not as if he was in danger of significant physical bodily harm. So let's just caveat all that. No, it was an uncomfortable situation where he got hurt in a typical thing that happens when boys fight. But he had to be the one to solve it. You see this sometimes where it's the bully at school or it's the bully somewhere else or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden there's this rush. We got to call the principal. We got to do this. Your son doesn't want the bully to be afraid of mom. Your son doesn't want the bully to be afraid of the principal. Your son wants the bully to be afraid of him. But that's never going to happen if he doesn't have to actually face that fear. So the question is how do you prepare him to go into it? How do you prepare him for the challenges? Because they're coming. The question is how prepared will they be one day where the consequences could be dire? And so as my son got older, it was more challenges. And then there's the physical challenges that come, but there's also the intellectual and the emotional challenges. There's the putting him in situations where he's got to problem solve. And when he fails, it's like, you failed. Well, but I tried my best. Oh, that's okay. I'm going to try my best to feed you. And when you're hungry, I'll be like, oh, try my best. Again, people look at that and be like, well, that's cruel, that's mean. No, that's preparation.
Guys, I'm going to level with you. It's important that you look good for your lady. And ladies, you know this is true as well. And that's why I'm encouraging you to go check out True Classic. That's right. I wasn't the first one to discover True Classic. It was my wife, because she wanted shirts that fit me appropriately instead of the crap that I used to buy at box stores that, well, you probably have some in your drawers as well. But the bottom line is I am now a true believer in True Classic. Why? Because it fits just the way it should around the shoulders, chest, and arms, while leaving a little extra space during the midsection, which I'm still working on, so leave me alone about it. But if you too want to get some great t-shirts, and not just t-shirts, my friends, dress shirts, pants, workout gear, hoodies, just about everything you can think of, go over to trueclassic.com/Nick and take a look at everything they have to offer, because I'm telling you right now, True Classic probably represents about 70% of my wardrobe. In fact, if they ever make suits, it's all of my wardrobe. trueclassic.com/Nick. Go check it out right now. Let's get back to the show.
So if I had to kind of sum this up, it's the idea of picking age-appropriate challenges that you create for your child and that sometimes are created for them, navigating them with the appropriate education, instruction in order to overcome them, providing them honest critiques of what they're doing, and always rewarding them for courage and honesty. They're not always going to get victory, but always reward them for courage and honesty. And here's the last part, because I want to spend most of the time answering questions. Here's the last part. Dads in the room, do you want your son to have a good relationship with God, to be intellectually formidable, to be physically strong, to be emotionally mature, and to be professionally competent? Raise your hand if you want those things for your child. Okay, are you those things? Are you those things? Because you're the one setting the example, him, not just for what you do and not just for what you say, but everything else in life. You are setting the standard that he's going to look up to, that he holds to account. You are the standard for what a man is in his life. And so in every single one of those categories that you just mentioned, if you want him to be spiritually strong and secure in his identity in Christ, are you? If you want him to be physically strong and physically capable, are you? If you want him to be professionally competent, and I don't mean rich, I just mean with capabilities that equip him to be able to provide for his family. Emotionally, do you display this sort of emotional maturity that you want him to be able to display? Do you have control over your emotions? And intellectually, if you want him to be able to be competent, to be able to go out, to be able to discuss, to be able to debate, to be able to understand, to be able to think critically, are you doing those things? Because if you can't do any of those things, you have no reasonable expectation that he's going to be able to. And I don't say that to discourage anyone, because anybody in here that thinks, nope, I got all of those nailed, is arrogant, not competent. Because there's never a point in any of our lives where we have achieved the pinnacle. So it's always a process of continuing to develop those skills. Now, here's the other thing that I want to add to this. The other thing that is absolutely critical is how your son watches you treat his mother. I didn't get to witness a lot of that growing up. But I do remember my stepdad, because my mom was going through a divorce with my stepfather, and him wanting to talk with my dad. And he was upset about something. And I ended up learning from somebody else later that my father sat down my stepdad and said, look, regardless of what happens, you will not disrespect their mother to her sons. They'd been divorced for years at this point. Both of them remarried. They obviously had not had the best interactions with one another. But here I am standing before you at 45, remembering something that somebody else told me about my father sticking up for my mother, who he wasn't even married to anymore. You will be absolutely shocked at the little engagements that you didn't think meant anything, that you didn't even think they were paying attention to, because you thought they were watching TV or reading a book or playing outside. When they see you treat their mother with respect and honor and dignity, you are teaching them how to treat their own wives. And the reason why that's so important is because there's been many times in my life where I didn't think I was living up to the standard that I should. But the thing that would always remind me, the earthly reminder that God had given me on a daily basis, was just the responsibility I owed to my wife to be a good husband, to be a good father. And so how that interaction goes is really, really important. Here's the second part. Wives, how you treat your husband, how you treat your son's father, is telling him a lot about what to expect from his wife one day. Now, I spend a lot of time on my channel talking about biblical masculinity. What does it mean to be a good father and a good husband? And I'm not using myself as the example. I'm using Scripture as the example, because that's the standard. There is a lot of Scripture out there about how dangerous it is to be married to a quarrelsome woman. If all your son sees is a wife that never backs up her husband, doesn't show him any respect, constantly undermines him, doesn't call out the best in him, then that's what he assumes a relationship looks like. And I guarantee you it will destroy him in marriage unless he somehow gets away from it. One of the greatest things my mother ever did for me in a difficult situation, because I will tell you right now, it was not her fault they got divorced. She never talked down about my dad to me. She always lifted up my father to me. She allowed me to be able to build that relationship with him, to love him, to respect him, to honor him. And as a result, I not only have a good relationship with him, but I adore my mother. Absolutely respect the sacrifices that she made. The other thing I will say for anybody in here that might be a single mother, this part's hard. There is no substitute for a dad. I'm sorry, it's just the truth. But there are things that you can do. My grandfather was incredibly influential in my life. Both of my grandfathers were. But so was my mom, because my mom also would do things that would call out the man in me. As I started to get a little bit older, she would give me more duties and responsibilities, carry the heavy things, open the jar. It seems simple, but what you're doing in that moment when you ask your little boy to do that is you're saying, I trust you with something that's difficult. I trust you with something that's hard. And I reward you when you do the thing that is hard. When he opens the door, when you're walking down the sidewalk on the store, he stands on the side closest to the road because he's protecting his mom. Allow him that. There's never going to be a point where he's not your little boy. But if you want him to be the sort of man that you admire, you're going to need to actually help call out the man in him and encourage your husband when he is doing the same thing. I always say this, and it's something that my son is aware of as well. One of the greatest compliments my wife ever gave me was stopping at one point and just said, I need you to know you make me feel safe. I could have gone a whole year on that one compliment. Right? But my son got to see that. My son got to see that. So all of this to say that there are going to be times where, especially as fathers, but not exclusively as fathers, you are going to have to be hard on your sons. There are going to be times where you have to create conditions. Because again, we live in a pretty soft time. You're going to have to create conditions where they are physically and mentally challenged. You're going to have to create conditions sometimes where they may fail and encourage them to get back up and do it again. Why? Because that's what a man does. And this part is one of the most important. We are in an age right now where masculinity has been so maligned and so shoved down and ridiculed and mocked, largely because of feminism. That we have a generation of young men that have been told that they're not supposed to be masculine. They're supposed to be passive. They're supposed to be docile. And you know what is a little bit tragic about all that? You know who hates passive, docile, weak men more than anybody? The feminists that helped create them. But what's starting to happen right now is that there's a revolt taking place. I don't know what woke culture was thinking, but woke culture loses. It has to. Why? It does not possess the means to ultimately defend itself. Why? Because it alienated young men. Who do you think fights the wars? Who do you think answers the call? Who do you think predominantly runs into the burning buildings? It's young men. You cannot build a culture around trashing masculinity and expect it to survive. So wokeness was always going to die. The question is what replaces it? Because the version of masculinity we're discussing right now is not the only option on the table. See, we're talking about a masculinity that is biblical, it is strong, it is powerful, it is smart, but it is also compassionate, it is tender. It is willing to sacrifice. But there's another version that's being pitched to people, which is brutal and hedonistic and seeking revenge. And I can't promise you which one of those ones is going to win right now with the next generation. I can promise you that the one that is most likely to win is the one which has the most examples to follow. So if the example that young men are getting is Andrew Tate, then that is the version you will get. And people look at that and they say, well, that's degenerate. That's, say what you want. That guy can fight. He can make money. He has nice, expensive things. He's surrounded by beautiful women. And you know what? He may have done a lot of horrible things to get there. But if you're a young man with no guidance, no positive male role model in your life, that'll do. We're asking them to be something which is actually more difficult. We're not just asking them to be powerful and strong. We're asking them to be good. We're asking them to be noble. We're asking them to hone all of those masculine traits toward a noble purpose. But if they don't have enough examples of what it looks like, we lose. And you don't want what happens next. So the thing I will tell all the fathers in the room right now is there's a lot of things going on in the world that you can't control, or that you have very, very little control. It is fascinating to me the number of people that I will talk to who fight so hard in the political realm. They will knock doors, they will go out, they'll vote, they'll encourage others to vote. They will go out and they'll shout in the streets about character and about honesty and integrity. And their own home is falling apart. I can look at various things in my life that I might have accomplished, and the secular world would say that is worthy of some admonishment, that is worthy of some praise. There is nothing that I have ever done that has ever been possessed a fraction of the importance of the husband that I am to my wife and the father that I am to my children, the father that I am to my sons and daughters. That's what really matters. That's what I've had the most control over. So I'm not asking anybody to stop intervening or engaging in all of the other realms. But if you're engaging in those realms to the detriment of your own children, you're not going to like the results. You're not going to achieve what you were fighting for. And this should actually come as good news to us. It is a good thing to understand that the most important thing you can do is actually the thing you have the most control over. Because I can say this now. I could write a small book on what I did correct. And I could write a very, very large one on what I wish I would have done better. But it is a testament to God's promise that even in the attempt, your children grow into something. Your children go into the sort of people that love God, honor the parents, and that you want to be around. So, I mean this as encouragement, but it's also a warning. I said this earlier when John and I were talking up here about the authority that you have as the husband and father over your home, about the authority that you have as husband and wife, but also as mother and father. When it comes to your sons, fathers, you are training your replacement in this world. So please, take that responsibility very, very seriously. And if what you see in the mirror is not at least close to what you would want your son to be, get to work, because he's relying on you. I'll go ahead and stop there. There's a microphone over here if anybody has any questions.
Can you give us an example maybe of a weakness as a father that you've noticed in yourself and what you did to strengthen yourself?
Oh, yeah. So let me do the physical one, because I'm nowhere near where I want to be, right? But I remember when I was in the Army, I was a Green Beret, right? I'm Green Beret. We're kind of a proud bunch when it comes to our capabilities on the physical realm. Like we can ruck march and we jump out of planes and we kick in doors and we flashbang rooms and we do other things to terrorists. But the point is that I left the military, and here's what I found out. Nobody was waking me up at 6 o'clock in the morning to run 5 miles anymore. Yeah, it turns out that was not a thing in the civilian world, right? Nobody was demanding that I do difficult physical tasks. Nobody was demanding that I go to the range. Nobody was demanding that I continue to keep up with the combatives. And quite frankly, I really enjoyed the opportunity to sleep in. And I'll never forget one year somebody saying, "Oh man, I wouldn't mess with Nick. He was a Green Beret." And I'm like, yeah, one time I was. But do I have capabilities or do I just have stories? And I started to realize, like, man, I'm 40. I'm 40 and I'm resting on things that I stopped doing when I was 31. I want capabilities. Because my son was still pretty little when I got out of the Army. Yeah, he remembers when Dad was in the Army. He remembers going to the drop zone and watching me jump out of helicopters. He hasn't seen that lately. So why am I not taking him and he wanted to do jiu-jitsu and boxing. Let's go do it. Why are we not going out to the range and shooting more? Why are we not doing other things that demonstrate physical strength? Why are we not going to the gym together? And so I got back into it. And I noticed a couple of things. One, it was really good for his confidence. It was also good for mine. Partially because when we started doing MMA, there was this one day where he landed this rear naked choke. And I mean, like you go through these drills, right, where you let him try to get the choke and the whole deal to get the technique down. Yeah, I didn't let him do it that day. He just landed it. And I'm sitting there and like my whole world is like the window, like you're about to black out. Like you can feel it. And I got up like just enough to like slam him down on the ground and get him off. And like they stopped it right there. And he's like, "You okay, Dad?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." He's like, "I almost got you there." I'm like, "Well, I'll be making out with your mom later." But the point is that I realized there was a point in my life where I was resting on past accomplishments. And I didn't want to do that. And so I needed new challenges, new things to do, new things to push me toward different goals and objectives in order to be for my son what he needed me to be. And now he's off in infantry basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, waiting on airborne school after that, among other things. And so that's what I would say was that weakness of having one phase of your life kind of end and then forgetting that you have to keep up on this stuff. It's not like riding a bicycle. I noticed that very quickly. You stop going to the gym, your abs are not like riding a bicycle. They go away. They become a K, six-pack. So that was an example of getting weak and then kind of getting snapped out of it and turning it around. And again, like I said, when I say I could write a book on all the things I wish I would have done better, I mean that very seriously. I've been sitting here on the flight up here, I was thinking, man, gosh, I got to be doing this better. I got to be doing this better. And it's not about sitting there and like self-pity or beating yourself up. It's more of like, this is an opportunity to be something for my children, for my wife, that they deserve. And they shouldn't have to ask for it. So I hope that
answers that question. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so my question has to deal with honoring my husband. The current situation is our boys are 8 and 10, and he chooses to remain on the opposite side of the country, and they're starting to ask me questions now, and so far my thing has been, I don't know why he chooses to live far away. I don't know why he hasn't made it to visit you when he said he would. I don't know. And so I'm wanting to be able to honor him where he is at so that like they still love him. They can still have a good relationship with him. But I also don't want to give them falsehoods, a false image of their father as they're growing up.
Yeah, you don't have to lie. You don't have to necessarily reveal everything, right? Like I remember I was 16 and I found an old wedding invitation for my mom and dad. And I looked at the date of the wedding and then I thought about the year I was born and my birthday. And the math wasn't mathing, if you know what I mean. You don't gotta lie, but you don't gotta reveal everything. My mom had never told me about that. My dad had never told me about that. My mom never told me why they got divorced. So you don't gotta lie. By the same token, there's ways where you can still assure them, like, I am sure your dad, loves you. I'm sure your dad misses you, and then sometimes it could be giving him a call, like the boys really need to hear from. Is it boys? The boys really need to hear from you. Could you give them a call? Or the boys really need to hear from, can you send a letter? Or is there a time where we could facilitate you guys seeing each other again? And so part of it is encouraging them, giving them some assurances that I'm sure your dad loves you. I'm sure your dad. Why does he live so far away? Well, that's where he's working right now, if that's true, right? And then calling him up, and this is the part where it can get confrontational, right? Not calling him up and be like, hey, you worthless deadbeat. Right? But like, hey, your sons really miss you. They would really love to. I know you're busy, but the soonest you could give them a call, they would just absolutely love to hear from you. This is one of the things that, it's funny, I've gotten a lot of questions, not this specifically, but things adjacent to it. I'm like, how do I talk to my husband about when Tina wants me to do something? She really plays into what she knows is my desire to want to provide and protect. Right? And all men, even if they're not doing a good job of it, want to be thought of as the sort of man that provides and protects. And so, again, it's not like she's manipulating me. She's just reminding me that I want to provide, I want to protect. She appreciates when I do so, and this would be a great way I could do it now. So sometimes it's about reminding him, hey, your sons love you. Whenever you get it, I'm not coming down on you. I know you're really busy. But if you could give them a call, if you got time right now, if you give them a call right now, they would absolutely love to hear from you. And sometimes the more interaction that takes place, the more it reminds them of the longing. Because men can get singularly focused on things and we can forget the things around us. And so sometimes we need to be reminded, we need to be snapped back into that reality. By the same token, there's other times there's some men that are just no good. Okay, there's some men that are just no good. There is a point where he no longer earns that. Now, usually that's in cases where they're abusive and things of that nature. Like, I'm sorry, you are under no obligation to put your kids in a dangerous situation, a genuinely dangerous situation, in order to maintain that relationship with the dad. But if it's just something where he's caught up, maybe there's trouble between you and him, but there's still that opportunity, you helping to foster that relationship is something that will pay dividends for the kids, for your ex-husband, and for you. So that's the way I would probably try to go about doing something like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey again.
Nick, so I have a 9-year-old boy, 7-year-old boy, almost 3-year-old boy, and a 5-year-old girl. My question is about a little bit how to be like hard and soft.
Yeah.
Because I was telling my wife, almost like years ago, like I would feel that I failure as a father if my boys turned 16 years old and they never got punched in their face.
Yeah.
Which she replied, my kids are not growing up in the favelas of Brazil like you. So like just where can we, a middle ground? Where can we find a middle ground?
I'm with you, man. Look, there's safe ways to do it with boxing gloves and stuff like that. Like sometimes moms and sons, fathers and daughters, right? There's a dynamic there. There's an absolute dynamic. I'm allergic to cats. Ask me how many cats I've owned because I got little girls that wanted cats. If my son had asked me for a cat, I'd be like, no, go clean your room. In fact, go do something worse. I can't believe you asked me, what the heck's wrong with you? My little girl comes, Daddy, can I have a kitty? Yeah. Right? So the moms have to hold the dads in check with the daughters sometimes, and the dads got to hold the moms in check with the sons sometimes. So sometimes it's about asserting, but it's also about demonstrating to her that like the rough and tumble, sometimes it's just explaining, right? The rough and tumble is important. There was this, I can't remember the name of the study, so forgive me, but it was talking about relationships between children and fathers and children and mothers. And they were saying that a lot of the security that a child gets, a lot of like the dopamine hits or the serotonin hits or whatever, come from cuddling with mom and playing with dad. And so sometimes it's about respecting those various roles that are being played, not just with respect to the marriage, but with respect to parenting. And so you let them kind of do that, and then you make them also aware of, no, I've got a role to play here too, and this is an important role. And so when they're little, it's the rough and tumble, it's the wrestling, it's the body slamming on the bed and stuff like that and getting used to it. It's when they run and they fall down and they scrape their knee and they're like, get up. Oh, it hurts. Be quiet, get up. What are you crying for? Nobody died. So, and then as they get older, it becomes a little bit more, I was just talking to somebody the other day, he started doing jiu-jitsu with his kids when they were 7 and 10. Right? And so now it's not just with you, but it's with other people. So you're teaching them to do that. But again, what are you rewarding them for? You're rewarding them for courage, for honesty, for effort, right? And for victory. But you're teaching them that the character component of all of that is every bit as important. And so when they fail, it's not like you're beating them down like, oh, you suck, you're a loser. That's not what it is. It's like, man, I lost. Yeah, losing stinks, man. Let's work harder. Let's work harder. You don't want to lose next time? Okay, let's practice some more. And so you're always on their side. That's one of the things that I feel like my son always knew about me, is even when I was being tough on him, I was on his side. Part of that too is dads need to tell their sons they love them. Like this whole idea that, oh, no, my dad never said he loved me, but I knew. Bull crap. Tell your son you love him. Okay, but men have a hard time feeling love if we're not respected. The first time your son does something hard and he sees you respect him for it, like, that was a good job. I remember one time my son stood up to a bunch of his friends that were doing something they shouldn't have done, and it was frustrating for him. He got made fun of. He was angry about it, the whole deal, and he was coming home and he was trying to work through it and talk about it and the whole deal, and I just stopped him. I said, I'm proud of what you did. And that was it, walked off. Proud of what you did. Good job. And he knew, Dad just showed me respect. Men will do more of what we get respected to do. And so that's what I would say. Do the challenges, insist on the challenges, help mom feel better about it. Be like, hey, you guys should go on a mommy-daughter thing away. And then just tackle them and shoot them with a paintball gun and whatever. But have fun with them. But yeah, every once in a while when you see that moment where they're doing something that is character developing, don't just say good job, look at them and be like, I'm proud of you. I mean, you think of men in this room. You remember a point where a man in your life looked at you and showed you genuine respect. Like a man you really respected showed you genuine respect. That's the day that's the day you start to feel like you're becoming a man. So do that with your sons. Welcome.
Hey, so I've got 5 kids. I grew up in a broken home as well. And I know the importance of teaching your kids to honor their parents, their mother and father. And, I think especially with those of us who grew up in a broken home, it's difficult to do that and to make that example. So my question is, did you ever deal with any bitterness? And if so, how did you overcome that?
I got to say, even though it was, I never felt, here's the interesting dynamic between my mom and my dad. Even when he couldn't be there for stuff, and even when he couldn't do things, she never ran him down, and I was proud of him. So my dad was a LAPD, he was a homicide detective. And so I was just so caught up in being proud of my dad that when he couldn't make it, it's like, it's okay, he's busy. So I never felt bitterness toward it, right? I never felt bitterness. So I think part of that was the fact that there was something about my father I truly respected, and my mother upheld that respect. But if I did not feel that way about my stepdad. I'll never forget the day where my mom said she was leaving. I'm like, thank God. And she's like, I thought you really liked him. I'm like, I thought you really liked him. You mean we didn't have to be doing this? So here's what I would say. When you're talking about biological mother and father, Scripture commands us to honor our mother and father. But Scripture also commands us to take care of our families. So what I always say is, I will honor my mother and father, but in the areas where their behavior is destructive toward my children or destructive toward my marriage and my children come before them. So I will not dishonor them, but I am not obligated to include them in factors of my life for which they are toxic. Now, thankfully, I don't have to worry about that. But for people that do, I think part of what you do, I'm a big believer in giving your parents a break to an extent. There's nothing more frustrating to me than when I see parents and I know their backstory and I know what they went through and what they overcame. And then you see their kids get mad at their parents for not being perfect. They're like, do you know what they overcame to get to this stage? So I think part of it is to the extent possible of saying, look, grandpa and grandma went through a lot of things. This is why it's tough and whatnot. And so we honor them, we respect them, but there's things that we don't repeat or that we don't do, right? They came up to the point where they did, and now my job is to do the best job as possible for you, and your job will be to build upon what I've taught you to be even better for your kids. That's what this process is about. And this is another thing too, I've told a couple people I've been talking here today, if you did grow up with that kind of brokenness and you have stopped it for your kids, every once in a while you grab your wife and you two look at each other and you say, it ended with us. It ended with us. There is so much power in that. That is an absolute blessing from God. And I just think every once in a while you should remind yourselves and revel, man, it ended with us. So I think you can be respectful, but you don't have to be inclusive of things that hurt you. You have to protect your kids from what hurt you. Hope that helps you.
So I have, I got 4 kids. My son's the youngest. Got a 12-year-old, 10-year-old, 9-year-old, and then my son's 7. I run a business. I'm currently trying to build a homestead. So typically when I get done, it's almost dark. So I'm trying to figure out how do I help build up my son with my time limitations. Because I've noticed he is being soft, and I want him to be stronger. I want him to be respectful, honorable, but I think it's a little bit more of a learned behavior simply because that's his environment throughout the day.
So you guys are homeschooling?
Yes.
And you're starting a homestead?
Yes.
And how old is he?
He's 7.
That boy can carry a feed bag. Seriously, include him. Include him in the task. One of the things that blew my mind, and it was one of those things that I realized after the fact and then wished I had done more of it. What I considered a chore, my son considered an adventure. So going to Lowe's was just something I had to do. I wanted to run in real quick. I wanted to pick something up. I would have, and yeah, I was 5 minutes slower because he wants to ask, Dad, what's that? Dad, what's that? Dad, what's that? But the fact that he got to come along with Dad to Lowe's, it's like a core memory for him. And if you remember it, those times when your father included you on something that for them was just a regular part of their routine. But I remember the first time I got to go with Dad to the police station. I mean, I could sit here and tell you the details of that day, right? Like 30 years later. So when it comes to doing some of these things, and look, believe me, not everything on taking care of a homestead is going to be a core memory for your kid other than, I hate these dang animals, right? But giving your kids responsibilities and then teaching them how to do something, and this part's really important too, then giving them ownership over something. So like my son, when we were we had our goats, we had our chickens, we had our meat chickens, we had our pigs, and then we had our peacocks because we're bougie like that. We call that our homestead bling. But my son ended up taking ownership of the chickens. That was his responsibility. And after a while, what happened was he took pride in the fact that was his domain. And so like building things for him or taking care of them or making sure they were in or getting the others, that ended up becoming something that we trusted him with. And every once in a while, I would go out and be like, hey, we got a problem, solve it. How do you want me to solve it? I don't know. I don't particularly care. Just get it done. And now he's got an opportunity to, do something with his own creativity to fix a problem in a way that I might not have imagined. So when he's little, it's you're coming along with me, and this is how to take care of the chicken. This is how you do this. And you see that one, and you see why they're doing that one. Okay, that's the rooster. He's protecting the hens. So you're doing this explanation. All right, now you take this and you go feed that one over there. Now all of a sudden, this is an adventure they're going on with Dad. As they get a little bit older, ask them questions. How would you deal with that? How would you deal with this? How would you fix that? Right? And then you say, okay, good idea. Go do it. Go fix it. Hammer and nails are in the thing. Wood's over there, right? Don't give them the expensive wood because they're going to get it wrong the first couple of times. But you start to give them tasks, and then you give them ownership over something. And before you know it, you've built not only core memories with them, but you've taught them responsibility, and now they have a pride in that responsibility. I remember one time, I think one of my daughters went and did something with the chickens, and Luke was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm the chicken guy in this house. I was like, I love it when my kids fight over it. That's my chore. So that's one of the things I would do. Like if your schedule's busy and you can't always make time, include them into it. Include them into the schedule.
My name is Derek Freeman. I just want to first say thank you for your service. I heard in your biography that you're a Green Beret.
I was, yeah.
And I just want to say there is one vocation cooler. That's an Apache pilot. I'll be over.
After he asks this question, he's going to have to go back, take a 6-hour nap, have a steak. But you know what? Nobody makes fun of Apache pilots when you're like, call for fire.
Actually, my question is somewhat related. The other part of your biography, I think you mentioned this. Your son's at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Yeah.
Encouraging my son in vocation. I have a brother-in-law who owns a business. And on the one hand, I see the time involvement.
Yeah.
But I also see that his son is with him. And that will be handed down.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I was an Apache pilot, served 8 years active duty, still in the reserves, and I worked for United Airlines. And as much as I would love to give United Airlines to my son, how do you encourage your family, not just your sons, but your daughters? You know, I have daughters. I want them to have a vocation, first and foremost, to be a mother, but not everybody can be a mother.
Hey, I'm speaking about daughters at 4, all right? Don't jump ahead.
How do you encourage your son in vocation and balancing that vocation? Your son's in the military. He's going to have to balance a very grueling career with his family. Just your thoughts on that.
Sure. The most important legacy I can ever attempt to foster with my children is not their profession, it's their relationship with Christ. Then it's the relationship with their spouse and their children. When it comes to professional disciplines, because I talk a lot about kind of 5 categories: the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, the intellectual, and the professional. One of the things I loved about the homeschool environment was it gave you really unique opportunities to be able to expose your kids to a lot of different, not only vocations or trades, but also entrepreneurship. But ultimately my job was to put in the best effort possible to prepare them for whatever vocation God called them to. And if that was the military, it was the military. If it was entrepreneurship, it was entrepreneurship. If it was going to college, it was going to college. But ultimately, that's what my job was to do. And so I didn't encourage my son to go to the military. He did hear Dad tell a lot of war stories with his buddies, and I think that might have had something to do with what he chose, but we didn't push any vocation with any of our children. We said, especially when they got into high school, we said, okay, you know how to read, you know how to do basic math. You know, we don't just mean to spend a whole lot more time on parallelograms. Like, what do you want to do with your life? And let's start providing you opportunities to figure out what that looks like. And then we looked at a couple of things. One of the things that we really instilled in all of our kids is that it's good for all of you to have professional capabilities that allow you to be able to provide for yourself. To my son, it was like, you have to be able to provide for yourself and you have to be able to provide for a family. So you have to develop skill sets. Now, there may be things you love. You may have dreams, and dreams are a good thing, but dreams don't feed you necessarily. So you either got to pick a dream that feeds you, or you got to pick an occupation that allows you to chase your dream, but you are responsible for you, your family, and your dreams, nobody else. So a big part of it was just teaching them that idea of personal responsibility. I remember the first time one of my kids got a job, I said, you're going to go to this job and you're going to say, this is my job. No, it isn't. This job belongs to the person that created the job. What belongs to you is your labor, your work ethic, your personality, your intelligence. That's what you get to trade. But if you want to say it's my job, then you go create that job. So sometimes it's just about mindset. And then what ends up happening is as they grow in their relationship with God, as they get exposed to different ideas, I think they become far more in tune and aware of what vocation they need to go into, and then you foster the opportunities to be able to develop that. But I'm going to say this too, and this always, I don't know quite how to say this the way I feel it. Be careful about this intense desire to tell other parents what college your kid is going to. I noticed this. When my oldest daughter graduated, oh, what college are they going to? Why do they have to go to college? Now, don't get me wrong. College can be a fine thing. It can be a necessary thing based off the occupation you want. But why am I only allowed to be proud if that's the route they chose? We told our kids early on, I don't owe you a car and I don't owe you a college education. That doesn't mean I won't help, but I don't owe you these things and you're never going to act like you're entitled to them. You want those things, then you're going to have to make the decisions and the efforts to go after them. I remember my oldest daughter is incredibly capable, very intelligent. And I'm not just saying this because I'm her daddy, it's true. And she was toying with this idea of wanting to go to college or wanting to go into the military and go into a field with linguistics. But she really loved the theater. Right now, you're a conservative Christian dad and your oldest daughter is, I love the theater. Like, you're going to starve to death. What if God is calling her into that vocation because she has a unique ability to be able to demonstrate creativity and logic and reason and empathy in a way that moves people in a way that nobody else can? It would be a pretty poor world if nobody engaged in those sort of creative arts. And so it was like, you know what, sweetheart, if that's the sort of thing you want to do, well then we're going to help you with it, but you need to understand it's very difficult to make a living in this field. So what are some of the other capabilities you might want to develop that will allow you to pursue it? And she said, you know, she graduated high school right around COVID. She goes, I'm not going to go to school for theater because I don't want an $80,000 college loan debt for a degree that might get me a $20,000 a year job. She goes, so here's what I'm going to do. She worked the night shift at McDonald's. She house sit, she dog sit, she raised all the money for it. She went to cosmetology school because she's like, this is a skill set that I can use no matter where life takes me, and I can use it in conjunction with the theater. So it gets me in the proximity of the area I want to be able to identify and create opportunities for myself while I can feed myself. So she raised $22,000. She paid for her cosmetology school. She went through, she graduated, got all her little honor stuff. And then within 2 years, she had not only made back everything she had paid for to go to college, but she had also saved enough to put a down payment on a house when she got married at 21. But I'm supposed to wish that she was a theater studies major with $40,000 in college debt. So all I would say is that there's been a tremendous amount of pressure put on our generation to go to college and to be able to tell other people what college our kids are going to. It's a fine thing to be able to tell your other people, oh, my child's going here, if that's necessary to what they want to do and if that's where God is calling them to be. So I know this was kind of a long, rambling answer, but it all boils down to your job as a parent is not to direct their vocation. Your job is to prepare them in a way to be able to develop a relationship with God where they feel confident in His calling. And then to physically, intellectually, educationally prepare them to be able to do that with confidence. And to teach them the areas of responsibility and character. Because here's the one thing I've noticed. If you can show up on time and you're a hard worker, you're probably never going to starve in this country. All right, so that's probably the best advice I can give on that. So, yeah.
Good afternoon. My question is, I have an older brother who's in the military and is moving up in the military and is constantly moved around, right, on different bases. And it's what my sister-in-law is struggling with is a lot of toxic masculinity, right? And he's being honored by it. And he's in a concentrated community where he's not, you know what I mean, getting good influences on the godly aspect and how to be a man on that side of things. And so he's a Christian and we were raised in a pastor's home. But I think the biggest thing is for a lot of families is when you are in a specific location and you don't have resources. And a lot of times, like as pastors, we say, get in a community of healthy men that can show the example, right? Yeah. But if they're in specific locations where that might not be a possibility, or is there, and you know of different resources for families that are trying to implement these things into their lives, or even their husbands might not recognize some unhealthy things because they are being celebrated. How do we address that?
Oh, God, I did it. I will tell you right now, when probably the first 7 years I was in the military, so that's all through the 82nd Airborne, all through the 25th, and into my time at 1st Special Forces Group, it's not that I walked away from my faith, but it wasn't active in my life. I'd go to the bars with the guys, right? Now, I didn't do some of the other things the guys were doing, right? I drew lines. Right? Like by the grace of God, there was still those moral lines that I would never cross, even when I wasn't fully walking the way that I should be. So I think there's but there was 3 men that I can point to that influenced me to once again take my faith very seriously. One of them was my neighbor, one of them was a team leader, and one of them was a guy I met in the Special Forces Intelligence Sergeant course in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You want to know what all of those men had in common? I respected them as being strong, capable men. Because I had gotten really tired of weak, lazy Christian men. I had gotten really tired. Like, I'm sorry. If this describes any of your youth pastors, I apologize. But like the skinny jean, like youth pastor, hey guys, skibbity. Like I want to hit him so bad, right? These men attracted me back to my faith because they were strong examples of biblical masculinity. It's like, yeah, that's a man who's capable. That man can shoot, move, communicate, fight, and they love Jesus. So some of it is about finding, now look, I'll tell you this. I've been stationed a lot of places. I've never been stationed in a place where I couldn't find somebody that kind of fit that mold. And so some of it is about seeking out and choosing to spend time with those people and to foster the relationships with those people. Sometimes wives will foster a relationship with another wife, and if the husbands don't jive or it's very, very different cultures, it doesn't necessarily work. That's not the sort of influence they're looking for. Anthony Brown, my neighbor, Ryan Nee neighbor, my team leader, those were guys I respected, and so they encouraged me to do the right thing. And so part of it is about finding those good, positive male role models where iron sharpens iron. Another important thing for a man is not only to be mentored, but to also be useful to other people. And so when you can put them in positions where they feel like they're able to accomplish virtuous things, noble things, it causes them to want to do more of it. It becomes habitual. So I think first and foremost, it's about trying to encourage them to find people. And look, my wife prayed that we would start going to church more and start taking it more seriously. But the thing that really knocked me into gear was when my 3-year-old daughter, my wife and I were talking about maybe going to church. My 3-year-old daughter said, "What's church?" And I was like, okay, I've got to change something because now I know I'm failing. So men respond to responsibility. Men who want to be good respond to responsibility. So good fellowship. And again, sometimes if you are in a situation where maybe it's a small base, you just don't have anybody that fits it. Again, going to various churches, trying to find other people, trying to find other activities or environments. I always give this advice to people looking for a spouse. I said, the first thing that's most important, you've got to have the same faith. You've got to have that same commitment to Christ. And then you go into the environments where you're most likely to find the sort of person that you would want to marry. It's the same thing with friendships. So seeking those out either within the military or outside of the military, and then fostering those. Yeah. And there's one other thing I will say. When you're in the military and you're in a unit with people that are maybe doing things you don't want them to do, or that you don't approve of, or that you think that are morally reckless, you can't just cast them off. You're going to go to war with that person. You're going to kick in a door and that guy's going to be right in front of you or right behind you, and you still have to be able to foster that relationship. And it's important for a wife to understand that I can't just throw this guy under the bus when we're going to be dependent on each other to have each other's back in a combat situation. But that doesn't mean I have to engage in the same activities. That doesn't mean I have to cover for them when they're maybe doing something wrong, right? And so part of it is also a wife understanding that is a difficult dynamic in the military where you do have to continue to foster some sort of relationship with the men you're going to depend on in dangerous situations. Welcome. What? Oh, last one. Good, because there's only one left. All right.
Good afternoon, sir. Sorry, I lost my voice this week, so I'm just going to do my best here. Yeah. You touched on it briefly, but I just wondered if you could speak to, as a wife, how can I support and encourage my husband in areas where I would like to see him grow? Like, I need to see him grow. Our sons and our daughter need to see him grow. I don't want to manipulate. I don't want to accuse and cut him down. But I feel like in talks, like sometimes it comes across that way, and like that's not my heart. Yeah. But I'm like, hey, buddy, need you to do some work.
Okay, look, 2 things. Guys, can we all admit that occasionally we need a kick in the butt? Can we all admit that we're probably married to someone that is more than happy to provide it? All right. Ladies, do you sometimes need a kick in a particular direction? So the first thing I will say is that men, especially when it comes to our wives, are probably more likely to let it go than to say, hey, I really want you to change this. That's not always the case. I find it's the case a lot. I find that typically in healthy relationships, the wife is a little bit more comfortable asking the man to change something than the man is asking the woman to change something. And the only reason I bring that up is because that part has to be reciprocal. Now, to the more specific question. Again, when my wife wants me to do something, she really leans in to me wanting to be the protector and the provider. So it's not manipulative. It's bringing my attention to something, not as a deficiency, but as in another way that I can be the sort of man that she knows I want to be. So if she were to tell me, hey, baby, I know you're really busy. So that's really important, right? It's that acknowledgement. I know you're really busy. You're working so hard. I really appreciate it. The girls really need a daddy-daughter date. You know, I was listening to a talk the other day. They miss you so much. Like, really all it needs to be, like, go get ice cream and just have a daddy-daughter date. They would absolutely love it. There's nothing on your schedule tomorrow if you want to do it then, you know. So part of it is helping to facilitate it and acknowledging that I'm not just arbitrarily dropping the ball. I might be really busy, right? Because I always say that I usually say there's 4 things, but honestly there's 5. There's 5 things that a man is usually really looking from a relationship with his wife. He wants to be respected. And we feel respected when we're acknowledged for our competence and our capability. So when my wife says, you make me feel safe, my respect, I'm like, yes, I am respected by my wife, right? We want to be appreciated. And for us, appreciation is generally associated with the sacrifices that we make for the people that we love. So when she tells me, I appreciate how hard you're working. You are such a good provider for this home. And I know it's really stressful at times, but I just want you to know that I just really appreciate it. I'm good. I'm good for another, 80-hour work week because I know I'm appreciated. We want to be desired. Y'all can assume what that means, all right? And we want to be loved, and we associate love with loyalty. The way my wife makes me feel loved is I absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt, if everything crumbled tomorrow, she would be right there by my side to help build it back up. Right? That's how a man feels love. Sometimes when you talk about like bromances or something like that, where a guy has a really good buddy and you ask him what makes him your best friend, it's because he'd show up at 3:00 in the morning with a shovel and lie and no questions asked. He's got to bury a body, and that's just what it is, right? It's that loyalty. The 5th one is peace, right? So if your husband feels appreciated, respected, desired, and loved, and you come to him and you say, baby, I know you're working so hard, but I don't know your son's name or whatnot, but he really needs some time with you. Like, I want him to be the sort of man that you are, and he needs some alone time with daddy. So I'm going to take the girls, and you guys go on an adventure or whatnot, and we'll have things ready for you when you get home or whatnot. See, right off the bat, when you do that, I'm not manipulated, right? When my wife tells me, I want our son to be like you, I feel respected. I feel admired by my wife. But he needs more time with you. Okay, that makes sense, right? I'm a logical creature. My wife is elevated. She's complimenting me on the sort of man that I am. She knows that I'm working hard. But in the midst of that work, there's something that needs to be done. There's something that's been forgotten. And it's something that only I can do. And so right there, she has called out the sort of man I want to be. I want to be a protector. I want to be a provider. I want to be a good father. I want to show my sons, how to be a man. I want to show my daughters that I love them. I want to show my daughters the sort of man they should expect one day when they get married. And so, yes, I want to do those tasks. And then maybe when she facilitates it, makes it a little bit easier for me to accomplish. And then you have that outing with your daughter that maybe you forgot because you haven't been on one in a long time. Or you have that experience with your son and you forgot about not only how much it meant to him, but how much it means to you. And so sometimes we just got to be reminded. But if it's, hey, you're so busy with work, you're so focused on everything else, what about your son? What about your daughter? Now I'm being attacked. And now my inclination is going to be like, oh, I'm so busy with work. Okay, good, because the mortgage doesn't need to get paid, right? Right? None of that needs to happen. We're just good? Okay, good. I'll just sit and take a day off and everything will be fine, right? I won't lose my job. See how easy it is to combat and fight and defend. But man, the moment it's, baby, I love you. Our son needs a little more time with you because You're the sort of man that, I want him to be like. Totally different mindset. Now, I'm not saying it's always going to work perfectly and your husband's just going to be like, well, thank you, wife. Let's go right now. Right? and here's roses. But I do think it's the best possible setup and the most reasonable setup to demonstrate appreciation and desire. Okay. All right. Well, hey, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time and the questions. And if there was a question you want to ask me, I'll be back at 4. We're going to be talking about daughters at that point. And again, I'll be at the booth. So if you do have any questions that you wanted to ask, you can get a chance to. Happy to do my best then and continue to pretend like I know what I'm talking about. All right. So.